There's a town in Johnston County, modest, quiet, sitting right off I-95 between the cotton fields and the truck stops, called Four Oaks. A lot of you may be from there. Population around 2,000. Most people who know it because of the exit sign or the Benville battlefield just down the road, or maybe the old story about how it got its name from a possum hunter and a stubborn stump. Well, today we're not here for the possum. We're here for the man the history books pretty much skip. His name was Isaac Evans, a black man described plainly in the historical record as such, whose family had been free since the 1700s. Now, I don't know if you know much about this country's history or the history of the American South, but to be a black man in the American South, multi-generational, since the 1700s, that's a big deal. And in 1886, when a railroad colonel came looking for land to build a town on, it was Isaac Evans' 40 acres that made Four Oaks even possible. Now, you let that sit for a second. There's all these stories about chasing out a possum in a stumpy tree, but y'all, it's Isaac Evans. Before there was a Four Oaks post office, before there was a general store, before there was 13 blocks laid out in a grid by railroad surveyors, there was Isaac Evans standing on land that his family had held for the better part of 2 centuries, and then he sold it. To understand why that matters, we need to go back a long way back. This is Joko Yo. Let's get it. Four Oaks was one of several towns founded along a branch of the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad completed through Johnston County in 1886. The railroad was pushing a new line between Benson and Smithfield, and it needed a stop in between. Colonel R.R. Bridgers, president of the railroad, was the man making that happen. The line extended through the farm of Kinch and Barber. Some of these names, if you're a Johnston County historian, you know some of these names probably. The railroad purchased the right of way from Barber and 40 acres to the south from R.J.P. Baker. On those 40 acres, the railroad surveyors laid out 13 blocks, 6 to the north of the tracks and 7 to the south. But that's not really the whole story, because the school system's own historical account of Four Oaks tells it differently, and a lot more completely. Colonel Bridgers purchased the right of way for the immediate site, then added additional acres with a purchase from Isaac Evans, a black man whose family had been free and in this area since the 1700s. His final plot was 40 acres, 13 blocks were to be the town. So Isaac Evans' land, specifically his land, became the footprint for Four Oaks. Now, the historical record doesn't give us much more on Isaac himself, no photograph, no surviving letters, just his name, his land, and that one remarkable detail, free since the 1700s. Man, that phrase is doing a lot of work. In 1886, Johnston County was 21 years out of the Civil War. Reconstruction had come and gone. Jim Crow was tightening its grip. Black land ownership, where it existed, was under constant threat. Economic pressure, legal manipulation, outright violence. For a black family in Johnston County to still hold land in 1886, they had to have been holding it for a very long time through very hostile conditions. Now, free since the 1700s means this family was free before the Revolution, before the Constitution, before the United States was even a country. They were free when George Washington was just a Virginia planter, and North Carolina was a collection of British colonies and Tuscarora villages. Who were they? Well, the historical record doesn't spell it out, but the description, a black family free in the Carolina interior since the early 1700s, fits a pattern historians have documented across eastern North Carolina, and it connects to one of the most consequential and least told stories in this state's history, but something that we cover here on Joko Yo not too infrequently, the aftermath of the Tuscarora War. The Tuscarora War ran from 1711 to 1715. It was considered the bloodiest colonial war in North Carolina. The Tuscarora, an Iroquois people who had lived along the Neuse, Tar, Pamlico, and Roanoke rivers for centuries, finally snapped under the weight of colonial encroachment, land theft, and the kidnapping of their people into slavery. The Tuscarora were known for harboring black fugitives, people trying to, not be enslaved. When colonial forces captured a party of travelers on the Neuse River in 1711, including the surveyor John Lawson and two enslaved black men, the Tuscarora killed Lawson but spared the enslaved men. Think about that. In the middle of a war for their own survival, the Tuscarora distinguished between the colonizers and the enslaved. The war ended badly for the Tuscarora. In the wake of the war, the Tuscarora immigrated on their own, joining the Iroquois of the Long House in New York. Entire villages left at first, and those that remained trickled northward in small bands, the last leaving North Carolina in 1802. But not all of them left. Not all of them left. Nearly 650 Tuscarora families continued to live in North Carolina and parts of Virginia and South Carolina. Those who remained, stripped of their formal tribal status, surrounded by a society that had just defeated them, did what people do when the ground shifts beneath their feet. They had to adapt or die. They intermarried with European settlers, with free black neighbors, with the mixed race communities that were quietly forming in the margins of colonial Carolina. Over the course of the 1700s, some of these families accumulated land, held onto it, passed it down, blended into the landscape so thoroughly that the census takers a century later would just write black or free colored and move on. Isaac Evans' family may well have been one of those families. We can't really say for certain. The record doesn't survive in that amount of detail, but the timeline fits. The geography fits. And that phrase, free since the 1700s, fits almost nothing else in Johnston County's history as neatly. Here's something worth sitting with. Johnston County sits almost directly on top of the old Tuscarora homeland. The Neuse River runs right through it. The Tuscarora lived in 15 different villages scattered throughout the Pamlico and Neuse River drainage basins. These were their fields, their fishing grounds, their ceremonial places. They had been here for generations before a single English settler drove a stake into the Carolina soil. By 1746, when Johnston County was formally created, the Tuscarora were gone, officially, but some of their descendants were still here, farming the same river bottom land, planting the same fields, holding deeds now instead of communal claims, but holding them. Isaac Evans' 40 acres may have been part of that long continuity, land that passed from a people who never believed in permanent individual ownership to descendants who learned to speak that language fluently enough to hold title, pay taxes, and in 1886 negotiate a sale to a railroad colonel. The town got its name from a distinctive landmark just off the rail line, an unusual oak with 4 trunks rising from a single base. The legend says a hunter chopped down a sapling to catch a possum and 4 shoots grew from the stump. That's a good story. It's the kind of origin story that a town, tells itself. Resilience from the roots, new growth from old wood, 4 from 1. But here's what doesn't make the legend. The man who owned the ground where those 4 oaks stood, Isaac Evans, a black man whose family had survived the colonial era, survived the revolution, survived antebellum period in a state where their freedom was both legal and precarious, and in 1886 was still standing on that land when the railroad came to town. Man, if that isn't 4 from 1, I don't know what is. 4 Oaks incorporated in 1889, and at that time had a post office, a public gin, saw and grist mills, a saloon, general store, church, and a population of a whole 25. Cotton and tobacco, railroad receipts, a young town doing what young towns do. Isaac Evans' name does not appear in the town's official founding mythology. You won't find a street really named for him unless you go out towards Smithfield. The 4 oak trees are what people remember, but every one of those 13 original blocks, every brick building along that commercial strip, every lot that was ever sold, every deed that was ever recorded in that town traces back to Isaac Evans and his land. There's a version of Johnston County history that is told through the railroad, the cotton gin, the tobacco auction. Prosperous white families building prosperous white towns, and that story's real. Yeah, it happened. But underneath it, if you look, there's a whole nother story. Older, quieter, a story of people who held on when everything around them was designed to push them off. Native families who became free black families who became landowners, men like Isaac Evans, standing on 40 acres of ancestral ground in 1886, deciding what to do when the railroad came knocking. Now, he sold it. We don't know why. We don't know what he got for it. We don't know where he went or what his family did after. The record gives us one sentence and a name. That's about it. But that name is written into the foundation of a town that still exists, and that's not nothing. I mean, in Johnston County, that might be everything. So drive through Four Oaks today and look for those 4 oak trees. They're gone. I mean, you ain't gonna find them. The famous stump is long since rotted. Trees themselves, just a story now, but that 13 blocks are still there. The old brick buildings along the railroad tracks, the depot, long since closed. The grid that railroad surveyors laid out in 1886 on Isaac Evans' 40 acres, oh, that's there. He was here. The land remembers, even when the history books don't. And y'all, that's the rest of what I got to say, all that I got to say on Isaac Evans and the ground beneath Four Oaks. Next time, got a lot more for you, but for now, y'all remember Isaac. If it weren't for him, y'all wouldn't have a Four Oaks. Be good.